and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 2 English lesson on adjectives. So we'll be doing our grade 2 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start with our lesson on adjectives, we are going to log into aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log in with our username as well as our password. And then we're going to select the subject of language arts, which is English. So then once you have selected the subject, the grade, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives. So there's quite a few lessons that we will be doing under the specific chapter of adjectives. All right. So our chapter is adjectives. The subject is English language arts, grade 2. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on is to use sense words. Does the adjective tell you either what kind or does it tell you how many? So an adjective, it does tell us either what kind or it tells us how many. We need to identify the adjectives that describe the noun. And then we're going to identify adjectives. So that is going to be our focus lessons under the chapter of adjectives. So we need to use sense words. Then we need to say, does the adjective tells us what kind or how many? We're going to identify adjectives that describe the noun, and then we're just going to identify adjectives. So we're going to go into what an adjective is. And before we go into what an adjective is, we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So we do go from time to time onto the web, that's the word, and we're going to aplusstudents.ca. So when it comes to an adjective, right, an adjective is a word that either tells us about the person, animal, place, or thing, or describes that animal, place, or thing. And then some adjectives that tell how it tells us how a noun looks, how it sounds, how it tastes, smells, or feels. So we see that it's some adjectives, they tell us how a noun either looks, how it sounds, how it tastes, smells, or feels. And that is why we say it either tells us about the noun or it describes the noun. And it can describe the noun in the form of how it looks, sounds, tastes, smells, or feels. So if we expand on, let's say, describing the noun, then we can say the sun looks bright. If we look at the second one, so the first one says the sun looks bright. And if we identify the adjective, and then we can say bright. And then we have the drums sound loud. So the drums sound loud. So the drums, they sound loud. So loud is how we describe the drum. And then these cookies taste sweet. And then the air smells fresh. So we have sweet, we have sweet, we have fresh, and my hair feels soft. And then we have soft. So these are words that can be used to describe a noun. Either bright, loud, sweet, fresh, and soft. So once again, we say that an adjective, it tells us about the person, it tells us about the animal, place, or thing. And some adjectives, they tell us how the noun looks, sounds, tastes, feelings, feelings, or feels. And then we have a few examples of so that is basically adjectives, right? Or an adjective. Then we have adjectives that tells us what kind or they tell us how many. And when an adjective tells us how many, then it means that the words that we are used to describe, we can then, for example, either count. If you say one apple, two pears, right? That is something that we can count. So we have adjectives that tells us what kind, and we have adjectives that tells us how many. And we said adjectives that tells us how many, It's, for example, where you put one, two, three, any amount in front of it. Because then once it is being added, right, and then that basically tells us how many. And then we have what kind. And what kind can be beautiful, short, soft, and so on. It's basically just different ways in which you describe the noun. All right, let's go to a+students.ca. So now we are here by our tutorial lessons on adjectives as a chapter. And we're going into our first lesson, which is to use since words. And we said an adjective is a word that tells about a person, it tells about a place, an animal, or a thing. And with this, and we also said that some adjectives, they tell us how a noun either looks or sounds or tastes or smells or even feels, right? And then we say the sun looks bright. So the word bright is an adjective. The drums, they sound loud, which means that the drums are loud. So loud is the adjective that tells us about the noun. These cookies taste sweet. So which means that sweet, it describes or tells us about the cookies and how they taste. And then the air smells fresh. And then my hair feels soft. So those are about adjectives that tells us how a noun either looks, sounds, tastes, smells, or feels. Then now if we complete the sentence with the best adjective. Our dog Ace walked all over the kitchen floor with his paws. What is the word that we can add to describe Ace, which is our dog's paws? So we can maybe say with his, oopsie, maybe we can say with his dirty paws. Because the floor was cleaned, but now there come Ace walking all over the floor. So we can maybe say with his dirty paws. And then we say, I heard a noise coming from the backyard last night. So I heard a noise coming from the backyard last night. I heard a So we can maybe say, I heard a strange noise coming from the backyard last night. So strange is correct. All right, so now let's go to our test. So we need to complete the sentence with the best adjective. This dish looks too, does it look too tasty to fit in the corner or too large to fit in the corner? So the dish looks too tasty to fit in the corner or too large to fit in the corner. So if we select the base but adjective, we can say it is too large. So the desk looks too large to fit in the corner. The road made the car bounce up and down. So we need to complete the sentence with the base adjective. Then we can say the bumpy road made the car bounce up and down. So the bumpy road. All right, bumpy is correct. My cup of soup looks too full or too silent. So my cup of soup, do we say looks too full or my cup of soup looks too silent? So it looks too full. All right, so now we're going to complete the sentence with the best adjective. A line of, is it empty ants or tiny ants, walked across the picnic blanket. So a line, so we can say a line of tiny ants because ants are very small, walked across the picnic blanket. So tiny. Right. And then don't drink that, do we say noisy milk or sour milk? So don't drink that sour milk. So don't drink that sour milk. So sour is the best adjective. And then we can say the soup is quite either salty or bouncy. The soup is quite salty or bouncy. All right, so we can say the soup is too salty. is salty. All right, so salty it is. So now that was to use sense words. Now we're going to, does the adjective tells you either what kind or does it tell you how many? Does it tell you what kind of things or do they tell us how many? It's like counting the amount. For example, when it comes to what kind or how many, they say an adjective is a word that tells you about the noun, right? It's like it describes the noun. And then we have some adjectives which answer the questions what kind. For example, the small baby smiled. So instead of just saying the baby smiled, we specifically said the small baby smiled. She carried heavy books. So she carried heavy books. And then we have some adjectives which answer how many. Remember these, we said that the nouns you can either count or they'll tell you how many there are. For example, one baby smiled. So not all of the babies, only one baby smiled. So number one. And we said some adjectives that answer how many. For example, one baby. She carried some books. So some. Mhm. So now we're going to look at the adjective in bold. Does it tell you what kind or how many? So we are going to look at the adjectives in bold and tell us if it's what kind or how many. So we're going to look at the adjective in bold and tell us if it is what kind or if it tells us how many. How many? So if it's how many, we can maybe say it is, I don't know, one, about one ice cream. All right. So we need to look at the adjectives in bold. Does it tell you what kind or how many? Mm. All right, so now we're going to look at the adjective in bold. You must say if it tells us what kind or how many. So she is nice, or she is a nice cat. So what kind of cat is that? It's a nice cat. So nice tells us what kind. So she is a nice cat. So nice. Nice does not tell us how many, so which means that it will tell us what kind. So it's a nice cat. It is a cool day. It is a cool day. So cool, does it tell us how many or does it tell us what kind? So yeah, the second one says an adjective is a word that tells you about a noun. And some adjectives that answer the question what kind or that answer the question how many. Here it says we need to look at the adjective in bold. Does it tell you what kind or does it tell us how many? So if we must tell what kind, right? Then yeah, if we look at this example, it says the small baby smiled. And then one baby smiled, and that's an adjective. And also, when it comes to what kind, the small carried heavy loads. And we said that some adjectives that answer the question, how many? For example, one, some, few, lost. Those are adjectives that tells us how many. All right, let us begin our test, where we are either going to say how many or what kind. It's where we will either say if it's how many or what kind. So does it tell you what kind or how many? He has brown skates. So brown skates. Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? So basically this one is what kind. He has brown skates. So we said it tells us what kind. Mhm. And then we need to look at the adjective in bold. Does it tell you what kind or how many? So wild. And wild tells us what kind. So what kind of animals did we see? We saw wild animals. So it's what kind of animals. And then Ruth has a big secret. Is it what kind or how many? So what kind? And then Cole has blue eyes. So we need to look at the adjective that tells what kind or how many. Cole has blue eyes. And this is what kind. So it's what kind. All right. Lindsay will send 7 letters. Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? Lindsay will send 7 letters. So 7 letters. Does it tell us what kind or how many? And in this case, 7 tells us how many letters Lindsay sent or will send. So how many? 7 tells us how many. And how many is correct. All right, so now we're going to identify the adjective that describes the noun. So there's basically a few words or words that describes a noun, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be a word immediately in front of a noun or after a noun, but there's words that describes the noun, which means that they describe it by telling us either how many or what kind. So that is why I say an adjective at times, not even at times, an adjective is a word that tells us about the noun, but it also describes the noun. And we say that an adjective is a word that tells us about the noun, and it either tells us what kind or it answers how many. And usually things that we can count, we say how many. So now we need to select the adjectives that tells us how many. So there are many people in the street. There are many people in the street. And we see that there are many people in the street. And the adjective that tells us how many is many. So we say that there are many people in the street. And many, it tells us how many people there are in the street. So many tells us how much. That is why I said when it comes to adjective that tells us how much, it can either be words like few, many, a lot, some, or we can count numbers. So we need to select the adjective that tells us we did that, how many. We need to select the adjective that tells us how many. I will write 2 letters. So how many letters will you write? 2, and 2 is our. So we need to select the adjective that tells us how many, and then I will write 2 letters. And the word 2, it tells us how many letters I'm going to write. And then I had a black cat. So we need to select what kind. The adjective that tells us what kind. So I had a black cat. So what kind of cat did you have? Then we can say a black cat. So black cat, it tells us what kind. All right, let's go to our test. We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. I had a hot drink. We need to say what kind of drink. Was it a hot drink or a drink? So was it a hot drink or just a drink? I had a hot drink. All right, so if we select our adjective that the top that tells us what kind, then we can say I had a hot drink. And hot is correct. Yes, so well done. Hot is correct. Now we need to select the adjectives that tells us how many. How many? I will write 2 letters. So how many letters will you write? So how many? And we said it will be 2. So 2 tells us how many. So what? Yeah, well done, Rebecca. We need to select an adjective that tells us what kind. So we need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. That is a giant whale. So that is a giant whale. So we must choose the adjective that tells us what kind. Giant whale. So if we describe the whale, then we can either say giant. Mm-mm. So we say giant whale. Yes, well done. 2 for giant whale. Giant describes the whale. So well done. That is a loud bird. We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. That is a loud bird. So this is a loud bird. So loud, it tells us about the bird. So we have now just identified or tell us what kind. So I had a black cat. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. So what kind of cat? Is it black or is it cat? So black cat tells us what kind. All right. So great tools. That is now the end of our lesson on adjectives, right? We will continue next time on adjectives. But for now, we have an adjective that either describes or tells us about the noun, and a noun is either people, places, animals, or things. So we said, this is a cold night. All right. So great tools. Once again, this is the end of our lesson on adjectives, right? And we said that adjectives, they either tell us how many, you can either count it, or it will tell us what kind. It can either be ugly, beautiful, big, small, loud, soft, right? So those are but a few of the adjectives. And we said adjectives, they describe a noun or tell us more about the noun. And what we did was we used a few of the sense words in adjectives, right? But for now, this is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much for joining the class, and you should have a good evening further or day further. Goodbye.